Hello, this is Liz Kelly, and I'm the Grant Specialist with the Minnesota Department of Veteran Affairs. This presentation is part 2 of a 4-part series called Reporting Grant Expenditures. In this presentation, we will continue from where we left off in part 1, looking at all the forms and spreadsheets that grantees will use to report grant expenditures. This is a closer look at that middle section on the documentation checklist, the section labeled Documentation to be submitted after grant funds have been expended. As you can see here, the reimbursement payment request form and the advance payment grant expenditure report form are nearly identical. The next item on the checklist was the budget expenditure spreadsheet. But before we talk about budget expenditure spreadsheets, we have to go back to the beginning of the grant period. If you are a current grantee and have an executed grant agreement, then you'll probably recognize this document, which is called a budget expenditure report. The report is the original budget that is negotiated with the state, which defines the grantee's allowed grant expenditures. The budget expenditure spreadsheet, which we are going to look at in a minute, is the spreadsheet where grantees record all of their expenditures as they relate to the original approved budget. Also, remember the amounts in this example. For travel, $6,000, and the fuel cards for $5,000, because I'm going to be referring to it a little later. The budget expenditure spreadsheet that will be submitted will show the original budget in the left 5 columns. And you can see here that the left 5 columns are the same as the budget expenditure report that we just looked at. On the budget expenditure spreadsheet, the grantee is going to report their grant expenditures as it relates to their original budget. So in this example, if you look at the highlighted yellow column, the payment request is going to be for a total of $15,675. Now, most MDVA grants are reimbursement based. So grantees usually will get paid several times throughout the course of the grant, usually on a quarterly basis or on a monthly basis. So in this example, the grantee a month ago or 3 months ago submitted their first payment request for $15,675. Then they did some more work, they incurred some more expenses, they're ready to get reimbursed for this new set of expenses. So they go to the original budget expenditure spreadsheet and they add another column and they add their new expenditures, which in this example total $11,138, which will be the amount that they're requesting to be reimbursed. The spreadsheet, because it's an Excel format and has embedded formulas, if you stop the presentation and take a couple minutes to look at it, automatically calculates the total expenditures per budget item and the remaining balance and the grand total. So that is how the budget expenditure spreadsheet is used throughout the grant period. Now, grantees that have advance payment grants as I mentioned earlier, usually get the full grant amount up front at the beginning of the grant period. And most grantees, maybe throughout the year, do the work of the grant. They spend the money that was advanced to them, and now they need to prove to the state that they spent the money according to their original budget. So they also will submit a budget expenditure spreadsheet when it's time to close out the grant, and it will look very similar to the previous one, except in this example, this grantee's original budget was for $100,000, and if you look at the column that's yellow, the grantee is showing that they spent all the money that was advanced to them as shown in the different budget categories. So both reimbursement grantees and advance payment grantees use the budget expenditure spreadsheet to track their expenditures. The next item highlighted on the documentation checklist was supporting documentation. And what that means is invoices, receipts, payroll records, advertising contracts, and so on. So in addition to the budget expenditure spreadsheet, for every item that is reported, there must be supporting documentation. So in this example, this grantee is reporting that they spent $2,000 on equipment. Then the expectation is that along with the budget expenditure spreadsheet, they are submitting an invoice that totals or exceeds $2,000 for equipment. This concludes part 2 of the 4-part series, Reporting Grant Expenditures. In part 3, we will continue working through the documentation checklist to look at the other documents that are submitted by grantees when they are requesting grant payments.